Hello. Very good to see you.
Good to see you.
Hello, and welcome to the next edition of Meet the Author. It's been a while since I last interviewed anyone about their books, and that's because last year I had a baby daughter, Lola, and babies and reading do not go hand in hand. So I'm exceptionally excited to be back, and who better than to kick off this next series than Simon Sinek, who has written the most phenomenal book, The Infinite Game. I absolutely love this book. I literally read it in 2 evenings because I loved it so much. And I feel like it needs to go on the desk and be read by every business leader, every MBA professor, every student, every politician. It is going to change the face of business for the 21st century. And I'm so excited because it's going to be that much of a game changer.
Thank you.
To truly sum up how inspirational this man is, I'd like to read a quote from a chapter in the book. As for us, those who choose to embrace the infinite mindset, our journey is one that will lead us to feel inspired every morning, safe when we're at work, and fulfilled at the end of each day. And when it's our time to leave the game, we will look back at our lives and our careers and say, I lived a life worth living. And more important, when imagining what the future holds, we will see how many people we've inspired to carry on the journey without us. Everyone, please welcome Simon Sinek. I'm so excited to talk to you today.
Thanks so much for having me.
So Simon, as your book has only just arrived in the UK, I got it from the shops last week, I thought what would be helpful is if you could just sum up an infinite and finite mindset to everybody.
So in 1986, a philosopher by the name of James Carse articulated these two kinds of games. He said, if you have at least one competitor, a game exists, and there are two types of games, finite games and infinite games. A finite game is defined as known players, fixed rules, and an agreed upon objective. Football. There's always a beginning, middle, and end. The objective is to win. There's usually a winner, and there's usually a loser. Then there are infinite games. Infinite games are defined as known and unknown players. The rules are changeable, which means you can play however you want. And the objective is to perpetuate the game, to stay in the game as long as possible. There's no finish line in an infinite game. And we are players in all kinds of infinite games that we don't even realize. For example, there's no such thing as being number one in your marriage. You can be number two, but you can't be number one. There's no such thing as winning global politics. There's no such thing as winning business. No one's ever declared the winner of business or the winner of careers. But if we listen to so many leaders, they talk about being number one, being the best, and beating their competition. And the reality is, how can you win or be the best in a game that has no finish line, no agreed upon metrics, no agreed upon timeframes? So when we play to win, when we play with a finite mindset in a game that has no finish line, there's some very predictable and consistent outcomes. The decline of trust, the decline of cooperation, and the decline of innovation. And so we have to recognize, first of all, what game are we playing, and then we have to play with the right mindset for the game we're actually in, which includes business.
You say in the book that it's for people who believe in something bigger than themselves.
Yeah.
And at the moment, we have so many finite people, mindsets in business, and actually one that got me really thinking was politics.
Yeah.
So, and both sides of the pond, other areas of the world, our political leaders are thinking for their own political game. They're thinking, what can they do for the short term, not the long term? And it's been really interesting just to see how they are messing up our countries because of it. And when you were writing this book, did you have politics in mind as well as business?
Yes, of course. I mean, I couldn't avoid it. I think that we have a leadership crisis in the world, and I think we've seen an increase of finite-minded leadership promoted since the 80s and 90s. A lot of the standardized ways in which we view the world, in which the way we conduct business, are really just theories that were promoted in the late 1970s and popularized in the 80s and 90s. Things like shareholder supremacy, where we prioritize the wants, needs, and desires of a disinterested external constituency over the wants, needs, and desires of our customers or our employees, was popularized in the 80s and 90s. It didn't exist prior to that. The idea of using mass layoffs, mass redundancies to balance the books on a regular basis did not exist prior to the 1980s. And so we've seen this increase in finite-minded leadership across business, but of course these philosophies have infected politics and university leadership and hospital leadership. We've seen way more short-sightedness and finite-mindedness across leadership in all facets of our lives.
Because people are actually being rewarded for their behaviours.
Yeah, and then the incentive structures we put in place only further promote finite-minded leadership. And though an election, there's a beginning, middle, and end in an election, and yes, elections are to be won. Once an election is won, then governance is infinite. There's no such thing as wins or losses in trying to do good for the country. There's no such thing as being number one. There's a head and behind, and we now live with political parties where instead of trying to come to common agreement where both political parties can go back to their constituents and say we both got something that we wanted, in other words, which is possible, by the way, that both can actually win. We now live in a world where it's not enough for one party to win, the other party must lose every single time. And we're the ones that suffer. As I said, trust, cooperation, and innovation decline, and we're seeing it across our own countries.
So have you got any thoughts on sending this book to leaders? Political leaders?
I mean, it's been sent.
Okay, great. If not, I'll send another copy as well, and we can hit them from both sides.
The reality is, anonymously sending books to people is not going to change the way they view the world. And there's a side of me that also believes that we get the politicians we deserve. And we are all quick to say how much we hate our divided nations and how we don't like how polarized we're becoming and how we think that politicians aren't serving our interests. But the reality is we're the ones that are the ones who are divided. We're the ones who aren't listening to the other side or to alternative opinions. We're the ones who sit in the echo chamber and only want to hear from people who agree with us. And I think we can do, instead of demanding that they set an example for us, I think we can do a better job of setting an example for them.
So you've got 5 pillars in your book about how you can lead an infinite lifestyle. And pillar 1 is to find a just cause.
Yeah.
This chapter really got me thinking. And it also got me a little worried because something I do predominantly in my role at Virgin is help our businesses find their purposes and help them embed purpose into what they do. This now, having read your book, seems a little bit outdated. And, well, hopefully you could maybe make me feel better about myself. But I've been sort of helping our companies come up with their purpose statements, making sure they embed purpose into everything they do, from making sure they're doing the right thing for their employees, looking after their customers, doing the right thing for the local communities, and also for the environment. But do you think it is outdated now? Should we be finding our just cause instead? What should I be looking for in the future?
Yeah. So the answer is it's all good. A lot of it is semantic. And so if I go back to when I wrote Start With Why, the reason I call it the why is because I got tired of having debates. What comes first, vision or mission? Or purpose or brand or any of these things. And I recognized that many people were preaching the same thing, but we had different words. Or we used the same word, but we meant completely different things. And so I asked the people who believed vision comes first, what's vision? And they said, well, that's why our company exists. And I asked people who believe mission comes first, or purpose comes first, and they all gave the same definition. So I said, okay, let's call it the why, we can all agree. But what I've come to recognize is as valuable as purpose and why are, they're origin stories. They come from the past. It's why the organization was founded, it's the reason we exist. A why is generally fixed, and it's a foundation upon which you build an organization. But where why comes from the past, a just cause is a look to the future. It's the vision. And again, you can use the word vision if you want, but the problem is the word vision doesn't have a standard definition. And so many organizations talk about our vision is to increase top-line revenues by X amount of money by X date. Well, that's not vision. That's just a goal. Our vision is to be the number one, company offering best product. Well, that's not a vision either. That's just some egocentric, statement. True vision, the reason I wanted to call it a just cause is for clarity, which is it's a cause so just that we would be willing to sacrifice our interests in order to advance this vision of the world that we imagine. And we commit everything we do, our organization and our efforts, to help advance towards that vision, knowing full well that we'll never actually get there. It is an idealized state. So I have a vision, I have a just cause. I imagine a world in which the vast majority of people wake up every single morning inspired, feel safe at work, and return home fulfilled at the end of the day. I believe that leaders are the best bet we have to move towards that world, and I've committed my entire career to helping advance towards that world. I know we'll never get there, but I'm looking to just move the needle. And what gives my work, my life purpose, is that I can look backwards and say, my goodness, we're actually moving in the right direction. And we all know what it feels like to work with an organization, to work at an organization where there is a sense of just cause, that we are moving towards something, and we are willing to sacrifice. Sometimes we may be offered a job at another company and be offered more money to move, and we turn it down. Now, rationally, that seems like the wrong thing to do. We should always go where we're paid more money, but of course not. We know that there are other things more valuable. And when I feel like I'm trusted and trusting, when I feel like my work is contributing to something bigger than myself, I would willingly and happily turn down a higher paying job offer to stay here.
And we're seeing many more millennials
Right.
Are thinking that way.
Yeah, and I think companies that haven't worked with purpose or use it as a punchline, you know, millennials these days want to work for a company with purpose, so slap a purpose on the website and now look, we're purpose driven and we give back to charity. None of, you know, yes, your CSR program is great, but that doesn't make you purpose driven. Just like somebody who gives to charity doesn't mean they're living a life of service, it just means they give to charity. And I think this is one of the reasons we see young people change jobs so frequently, is because the places that they're going hoping that there's just cause and purpose at the foundation, they realize it's a lot of words and a lot less action.
So you talk about businesses having a just cause. Do you think individuals should sit down and think about what your personal just cause is as well?
Yeah, of course. Where a why is fixed, and there's only one of them, you know, every single person has a why. It is unique to us. It comes from how we were raised, and it makes us who we are, right? There's no changing who we are. We can just change how we go about bringing our why to life. But a just cause, you get to pick whatever you want. You can have a just cause for your family, you can have a religious one, you can have a professional one, and it's something you devote energy and effort to seeing it advance. So absolutely, you can have multiple just causes. I would imagine there is a theme to all of them, but that's just because we know what inspires us in a day. But yeah, sure, absolutely.
I'm going to start thinking about mine.
But what's really interesting is I think especially young people put a lot of pressure on themselves, like what's my vision, what's my just cause? And the reality is there's only a very, very, very small percentage of the population that we would describe as visionary. You know, your Elon Musks, your Richard Bransons, your Steve Jobses. There's a very small percentage, and we're not all like them, and we're not going to be. So to hold ourselves to that standard is kind of depressing. And so I don't think that we need to come up with a vision. I do think we have to find one. And if we hear a leader who articulates a vision of the world that really inspires us, that we want to help build, then we can take their vision and we can make it our own. So when Martin Luther King said, I have a dream that one day little black children will hold hands on the playground with little white children, there are many of us who said, I want to live in that world as well, and his dream became my dream. I articulated it and spoke it as if it were my own, and this is how we get armies of people contributing to making the world a better place. So we don't have to come up with a vision, but we do have to find one.
Yeah. And so the issue with the purpose and businesses having purpose, I think many businesses in this room today, actually all of them, will probably have their own purpose statements and they're really living towards that purpose statement. You can still have that, and you can still have that as the driver, but make sure that it is fully embedded in your business. And then you have, it could be very similar to your just cause, but your just cause is just future.
I would add, just cause is future. It's an idealized future state that has nothing to do with your product or your service. Mm-hmm. That we are working to build this, and we believe whatever we're doing will contribute to that. We're not the only ones, you know, where Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak wanted to empower individuals to stand up to Big Brother. Well, the personal computer is a great way to do it, but there's many ways we can do it, and there are many others who are doing it. But the reason we call them leaders is because they led the way. Not because they were the biggest, but because we followed them, and by the way, other companies copied them. And that's what leadership is.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean you're the biggest. It means other people do what you do. Other people go in your direction. So an organization founded with purpose, which is always a good thing, I would just push a little bit and say, to what end? And by the way, we can share that vision. You can have organizations that all have maybe slightly different purposes, but we actually all want to contribute to something bigger and better.
I loved the idea in the book about different job titles.
Yeah.
And how most job titles explain what the job does.
Yeah.
You've got your chief marketing officer, you've got your chief technology officer, your chief operating officer. But when it comes to the perceived top job, the chief executive officer, what does that mean?
It's exactly right.
It doesn't really explain what it does. And I absolutely love that. I'd love you to say the title you think it should be,
Yeah.
and also what you think that job description would entail.
Sure. So I thought this was funny. Like, as you just said, like, we know what someone's job is going to be in the title. So if you don't know how to read a balance sheet, I don't have to look at your CV. I know I'm not going to make you the CFO, right? It's obvious. So it raised the question, what is a CEO? What is a chief executive officer? We actually have no idea what they do. And so you get any shape and fashion of CEO because they're not told what their job is. And so what I proposed is to replace the title of CEO with CVO, a Chief Vision Officer. Someone who is responsible for setting, articulating, and ensuring that the organization is heading in one direction. And then hiring the people and giving them the vision and saying, build the finance, build the operations, build the marketing, all towards this. Somebody has to be responsible for the direction of the organization beyond the short term. And so when we put CFOs or COOs in a CVO job, very often they become operationally minded. The organization often becomes much more short-term focused because there's no one standing on the upper deck looking far, far ahead saying, guys, this direction. And so I think we need a CVO, which is not necessarily the top job. It's just the job responsible for the direction of the ship. And they're supposed to work in partnership with the operator. It's the person looking ahead and the person looking down that can direct an organization to get where it's going. So yeah, I think we need more CVOs.
Yeah, and every time I actually read about the CVO traits in the book, I kept thinking about my dad. I was so proud of him actually, because I was like, every single chapter, I was like, yeah, my dad is exactly like that. That's what he's doing. He's always not worried about the winning, not worried about the money. He's much more worried about, how can he make the business best for his people and for the customers. And he's just done that innately from the very start of when he started businesses. But then that got me thinking as well, does that mean that to be a CVO, it's innate in you? Or do you think you can be taught those traits?
So that's interesting. Leadership is definitely learnable. Leadership is a skill. And I think that I think there are different personality types, but there are operationally minded people who can absolutely become CVOs, but they have to recognize what got me here won't get me there. And I actually have to have the courage to let go of looking down and in to looking up and out. And your dad sort of has gone on the record plenty of times talking about how he had no idea how to read a balance sheet, and he sort of had to learn it. And it's the vision that drove the organization, not his ability to understand the finances. There were people to help with that, but somebody has to set the direction. I think it's a personality. I think there's overlap. I don't think anybody's purely one thing or the other. And I think the exaggerated visionaries, like the Elon Musks, like your dad, who really sort of stand out in our society, probably are way more visionary. But I think it's possible for anyone to look up and out and say, here's the world that I imagine living in. Remember, the visionary isn't the one that necessarily is the only one who contributes to the vision. They're just the one who have the imagination to be able to see the future that the rest of us can't see. The way I like to describe it, it's a visionary looks at the ocean and describes an iceberg that's completely submerged and says, this is what the world looks like. And we're all looking at the ocean going, there's nothing there. And one person says, oh, I think I see what you see. And they start working, and then there's a tiny little bit of iceberg that pops up as the company starts. And then a couple of people go, oh, I see what you're trying to build. And then more people join. And the iceberg, you start to have some success, and now there's a little bit of iceberg. And then you have a big iceberg, and people are like, you're so successful, but the visionary still sees all the iceberg underneath the ocean. And that's what the visionary has the capacity for, is imagination. And I think that it's really, I think vision is really it's creativity. As I said, it's something that is not tangible. And those who are much more operationally minded need to see the bit that's sticking out of the ocean before they can start to imagine that it could be bigger, it could be more. So that might be innate. That might be innate.
But hopefully now for people who have got a very fixed finite mindset, having your pillars, will hopefully, it's like a bit of a business book, a bit of a learning book.
Yeah,
we
that's
can
the
learn
goal.
how to be a bit more visionary.
Yeah, and to work with those who have complementary skills. None of us can be expected to know how to do everything. And so visionaries, the truly infinite-minded, need the finite-minded. Otherwise, nothing's going to work. You know, vision without execution is hallucination. It's just, you got to get stuff done. But at the same time, the ones who are really good at looking down and in, who are really good at sort of getting things made, their work becomes vastly more fulfilling and inspiring when they know that each win that they have is actually moving the needle towards something really, really big, and it's not just for winning's sake.